Hello and welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. I have with me today my co-host, Darrell Becker. Darrell, how you doing?
Hey, Chris. Good to be back.
And as well as a special guest, I have Peter Voss with us to continue the Artificial Intelligence series. Peter, welcome to Choice Conversations.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Peter, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what your background is and, just who Peter Voss is and how you got to this position where you have this interest in artificial intelligence.
Sure. Well, I go back quite a long time. I started off being interested in electronics, and I worked as an electronics engineer for quite a few years. And then microcomputers started appearing on the scene, the early Apples and so on. And I fell in love with programming at that stage and kind of really switched over from electronics to software primarily. And I saw a great opportunity for taking these small microcomputers and applying them to businesses. Now, not Apple computer as such, but there were other little bigger microcomputers that we wrote the business software for it, and supplied complete business systems to small business which couldn't otherwise afford a computer at that time. A mini computer or mainframe they couldn't afford. So they had their own in-house computer, and we provide hardware, software, training, support, everything. And that business became quite successful. We grew to 400 people and listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So that was quite a wild ride and very, very exciting. But it also, that period of developing software made me aware of how stupid software is, how brittle it is, that it's, if the programmer doesn't think of every single scenario that can happen and the user uses it in some other way, it comes across some other situation, there's no common sense in the software. There's no intelligence, so it'll just do something really stupid or crash or whatever. So when I sold my interest in the company, I had enough time and money on my hands to really pursue this idea of, well, how can we make software more intelligent? And I spent almost 10 years bringing myself up to speed on artificial intelligence research, but also really understanding what intelligence is. So I went into psychometric testing. How do we test intelligence? Cognitive psychology, theory of knowledge. How do we know anything? How does knowledge relate to reality, and even into ethics, what's good and bad. And so really trying to understand knowledge and intelligence from all aspects, and trying to see where computer technology, artificial intelligence, how far it had gotten. And, that's really been my passion now for the last 25 years. And about 13 years ago, actually launched a research company focusing directly on the original goal of AI, and that is to build thinking machines that can think and learn at the level that humans can reason and understand. And that's sort of my background on that. And this 13-year period was interrupted by six years of launching a commercial company to take some of that early technology that we developed and apply it to automated phone systems. When you call a company and you talk to a computer and you hate it, everybody hates them. Well,
right.
You'll hate ours a lot less because they have some intelligence in. But it's still early days. They're not super smart, but they're certainly a lot smarter than the ones without a brain. So that took like 6 years out of my research, launching the commercial company, and that company called Smart Action I handed that over to a CEO about 18 months ago. So I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day running. So I'm now back to R&D, and I have a new R&D company called AGI Innovations, about 10 people here, and we're doing pure R&D, trying to make computers more intelligent.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's funny. One of my friends, he says when he gets frustrated and he's talking to a machine, when he's talking to an artificial intelligence on the phone, and he wants to talk to a human. He's like, the quickest way to get a human is to just start swearing at it. So that works every time. You get to a human right away.
Right.
Yeah. And then, it's funny. You also said, like, you became interested in artificial intelligence because of how stupid software you found it to be. And I have some background as well as a programmer, especially early in my career. I still do some programming to this day for my side job, which is investing in the financial markets. I enjoy programming, to find different trading systems and the like, and it brings me a lot of pleasure and as well as a few dollars from time to time. Back when I was doing it more as my day job, I remember talking to a coworker, and she said to me, she says, yeah, the problem with computers is they do exactly what we tell them to do. Not what we intend them to do, but what we tell them to do. And I was sitting there thinking about it and I'm like, yeah, that's true. Because if you look through, it's doing exactly what you told it to do, but not what you intended. Kind of like the letter of the law, not the spirit, and you end up with like these magician's apprentice kind of scenarios where, you tell the program to start sweeping the floor, and the next thing you know, your castle's flooded. So,
right. Yeah, I think that is a good description of it. That it doesn't take the spirit of what you instructed, whereas humans do that automatically. We have common sense, we have the context, we have background, so we automatically generally interpret things, correctly, if we're in a conversation.
Right. You said this is your passion. This is something that you've dedicated a significant portion of your life to. I guess, you must be optimistic as far as, because there's some people who are very pessimistic about the potential of an artificial intelligence. I guess, where do you see, what benefits do you see from artificial intelligence that's driven you?
I'm glad you asked me the positive question first. Usually when you start talking about the dangers of AI, then the conversation goes downhill very rapidly.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's not important. It is. It is truly very important. But yes, the first thing driving the positive things of why I'm working on this so hard and why it's my passion. Yes, it's a challenge. That definitely factors into it. It's, one of the biggest challenges we can actually reasonably tackle at this time or sometime soon. But more specifically, it's really the benefits of having lots and lots of, the way I like to describe it, if we had millions of PhD level researchers available to us that can just work 24/7 without any of the distractions that we have, wine, women, and song, and share information among themselves without ego, and the amount of progress we could make in the difficult problems that face us, such as disease, pollution, energy. And I'm personally I'm a futurist, and I'm personally very interested in living as long as I can. So being able to conquer aging, or at least delay it significantly, it's really, really hard. These problems of, pollution, governance, how do you put together administration or government or lack thereof in a way that actually functions. There's just so many problems that seem to be beyond humans to figure out by themselves anytime soon. So having AI, I believe, will allow us to solve many of these problems. And another way of looking at it is almost that we need it. I think there's a high risk if we don't have AI, we'll destroy ourselves.
Yeah, I think just eliminating money from the equation for research would be huge. So, I'm sure as you're aware, so much of research, it's like if you're not coming out with research that supports the theory they want, right. If it's not supporting the solution right. that whoever's funding you wants, you don't get funding again.
Right.
So if you're doing research for a drug company and your research says, hey, you know what, it's probably not in people's interest to keep taking drugs from you. You know, they're not going to fund you anymore. You know, your funding is going to dry up, and you're going to get blacklisted. It's going to get around that, hey, don't waste your money on this guy.
Right.
And so just getting that out, I mean, it's like we just want to know the truth.
Absolutely. Right. And, I mean, the AIs, advanced AIs might tell us things we don't want to hear, but if they say it consistently enough and, don't really have those extra agendas, once the cost drops significantly below that of below that of a human, then we can obviously do a lot more research.
Yeah. I've also used a similar description of the benefits in previous shows in this AI series Darrell and I have been doing, where I'm like, just imagine how much benefit, having an Einstein does for like the human race. Well, now Einstein, you can clone him and you can have 100, 1,000, 1 million, just like essentially you're only limited by your hardware, let alone that's just a genius level human intelligence. What happens when you go to superhuman level intelligence? I'm not sure, but I'm really excited to find out because, all of these problems, we would now have a lot more resources. We'd have a lot more intelligence to throw at the problems that humanity faces collectively and individuals face individually. Right.
So, in terms of the dangers, unfortunately, there's sort of a lot of hype around this thing, and there's obviously also a lot of passion. Now, there are a couple of serious misunderstandings, and I think, and I don't know if you've covered this previously, but the one problem is described as sort of a paperclip maximizer. Is that something you've covered before?
I'm not familiar with what that. Okay. I think I have.
Okay. Well, let me
go ahead and explain it.
Let me quickly say. So one of the points that sort of Elon Musk caught onto and Stephen Hawking is the idea that you could build a perfectly intelligent system, a very intelligent system that has been given a certain goal, that has some kind of a super goal, but you somehow got the goal definition wrong. And so this is sort of the thing that does what you told it to do too literally. And it ends up, maximizing paperclips because you told it at some point it's important that you need some paperclips, I mean, it's such an absurd scenario that I struggle explaining it, but.
It's a magician's apprentice.
Yeah, people have written about it, have sort of put it in a quite a plausible way. What it boils down to is that you design the system, with a certain super goal, and that super goal is sort of somehow off, and then the system does something incredibly stupid. And that's basically I don't know how intelligent people sort of, how many intelligent people have sort of bought into this idea that's inherently self-contradictory. You're on the one hand saying, this is a super intelligence that is more intelligent than people, and yet it's that stupid that it can't realize that, no, that's not really what you wanted, the literal thing. So there seems to be a really fundamental misunderstanding of what AI is all about.
Well, I'd like to get into what AI is all about, but I think some of us like to start off with definitions, Peter. So, certainly many of us are familiar with Siri in our phones or other types of flow charts where questions are delivered and then answers seem to be pretty much preset along certain parameters. Would you help us maybe just define intelligence and artificial intelligence? Just wondering.
Yeah, certainly. This is kind of a big topic. So let me start with a few things. The original intent of AI, when the term was coined 50 odd years ago, was to build human level intelligence. And you could kind of argue what exactly that means, but roughly, it's not about the Turing Test, and we might get to talk about that. It's not specifically that, but it's basically you can have a normal conversation, intellectual conversation. You can, with an AI, and it can follow you, it can make suggestions, it can do research, it can read a book and learn from that. So that intellectually, cognitive skills are at least the level of a human, well-educated human, and probably in many cases beyond that. So that was the original intent of AI, to have that human level cognition, learning ability, reasoning ability, and so on. And it could learn on an ongoing basis. I actually just recently put up a website called realagi.com, where I'm actually putting these ideas down because in the debates about AI and AGI, we, constantly covering the same topics. I'm actually starting to kind of build up a library of FAQ, frequently asked questions on that. So that was the original intent. Then, and 50 years ago, they thought they could crack this, in a few years, and that, have machines at human level very, very soon. And the decades went by, and governments put in billions and trillions of dollars, especially in the 60s, 70s. The Japanese had the fifth generation project, and obviously Britain and America in particular put huge amounts of money into AI, and they couldn't really get anywhere near human level intelligence. The systems were still brittle. And, there's a whole long list of reasons of why they didn't succeed, but certainly they didn't succeed at the original goal. So over the years in the 80s, sort of the winter of AI, when AI became a swear word, and, it wasn't the kind of, you didn't want to mention that you were doing AI if you wanted to get funding. So what happened is the field of artificial intelligence focused on narrow problems, on specific problems. And then, of course, a big breakthrough was when Deep Blue, became the world chess champion. And but that was narrow AI. It's solving one particular problem at a time. And now, more recently, we have Jeopardy. So over the decades, AI has changed from the original thing of having a general intelligence that can learn, many different things, can learn to play chess and do Jeopardy and do medical research. It changed to building machines where humans would put their knowledge in, or their way of solving a problem, would code it, put it into code, and then achieve, pretty spectacular results. And series of that ilk, Watson, and pretty much everything that's called AI these days, autonomous cars, is basically specifically designed. Humans put their knowledge and code it into it. The system doesn't actually acquire and learn those skills. And about 12 years ago or so, a group of AI researchers that had a similar idea of, shouldn't we be going back to the original, is it time now for us to go back with all the advances in hardware and software, that we should go back to the original ambition of AI and build truly intelligent thinking machines. And so to separate ourselves from that, we coined the term AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. And in the last 10 years or so, this term has actually become quite accepted and quite widely used. There are now annual conferences, AGI conferences. So it's generally now understood that AGI is the subsection of AI that focuses, that's gone back to the original ambition of building truly thinking machines.
Wow, artificial general intelligence. So is there a way that maybe the layperson can understand the differentiation?
Yes, it's narrow AI versus general AI. So narrow AI, you build a computer that does one task, and it may do it really well. Like doing optimizing container packaging, or playing chess or playing Jeopardy or driving cars. General AI is essentially a brain that, without further programming, it could learn to do each of these things in the same way that a human can learn. The same humans from the starting point, not having the knowledge, they can acquire the knowledge. So instead of then having to design, to engineer an AI specific to each application, you can take your one general AI and simply train it to do the many different things. The other major advantage is that it can learn and adapt over time, whereas narrow AI is specifically coded to do one task. And typically there's very little learning that happens. There's very little that it can adapt itself.
So, Peter, back when I was getting my computer engineering degree, I took an artificial intelligence class. It was a 400-level class, and it was all the narrow AI. So, like, I programmed a game to play Connect 4. I don't know if you're familiar with that game, if that's universal or just an American thing.
No, I'm not familiar with that particular one, but yeah, I get the idea. Mm-hmm.
It's a simple, I guess you would call it a board game, although it's not technically played on a board. But it's probably about the complexity of checkers,
right? Maybe
a little less complex than checkers. At any rate, I programmed an artificial intelligence, and it was, my first time programming artificial intelligence, is first time using the language Lisp.
Right.
I don't know if that's still used.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it was, I got it, with, I don't remember how many hours it took me, but it was able to, like, you couldn't beat it, basically. So I could set as a parameter for the game the number of moves to look ahead.
Right.
And if I set the number of moves to like 10 or more ahead, it was basically you couldn't beat it because you weren't able as a human, you were too limited to be able to look that many moves ahead. At least I was.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that was relatively easy to do. Like I said, it was just my first time ever using that language, and I programmed in like a recursive algorithm to handle that specific problem. So in general AIs, where they're learning, is it the kind of thing where are they actually able to like reprogram themselves? I mean, I'm not sure if there's a way to explain it that the layperson could understand how a general AI, how you would program it to be able. Is that how it would be? Would it be like they reprogram themselves, or am I thinking about that wrong?
Right. So it's not. Maybe, I probably don't want to get too technical about that, but, you mentioned Lisp, there are programming languages where the information that the system has, the skills and the knowledge, are sort of mixed completely with the program itself, and that they can dynamically rearrange that. So I wouldn't say that they reprogram themselves, no more than we could kind of loosely use the term, we reprogram ourselves. If you've learned to do something a certain way and you find, well, that isn't really the right way to do division or whatever, and you reprogram yourself. It's sort of in a similar sense that an AGI would do it. It wouldn't be changing its source code itself, but it would be changing its knowledge that's embedded in it, but the knowledge is more like data that can be adjusted. And, many of the AGI approaches use some kind of artificial neural network approach, where basically all the skills and all the data is represented in, nodes and links, and the system basically dynamically, as it learns more things, adjusts these links and creates more nodes and links, at a very abstract level, similar to the way our brain works.
Right. Yeah, I know I've in some movies, which of course are highly accurate at when, reflecting what's actually going on in reality. Some movies I know have referenced like rewriting the code. I believe we reviewed Transcendence, which was a pretty awful movie, but a recent one with Johnny Depp, so it was
right.
Due to the recent nature of it, we decided to review it. And one of the first things he does, and the idea in that movie is he transcends, he uploads his brain into his computer, but one of the first things he does is he's like, oh, this code is really
right.
cumbersome and it's holding me back. Let me just rewrite this.
Right.
Oh, yes, that feels better.
Right. Well, actually, that in principle is not that silly, but I want to make a distinction here between a normal, conventional learning, and that's what I've described, where you're basically adding nodes and links or readjusting them, which basically will give you, new skills and new knowledge. But the part of where you really where you're changing or rewriting code, that's typically thought of as part of being recursive self-improvement, where the system can then redesign itself fundamentally. Because one of the skills that an AI can learn is, of course, to become a computer programmer, an AI specialist. And it can then, of course, look at its own source code and say, well, how can I optimize this? How can I make this better? And so that certainly, in principle, is quite realistic in that sense. That will happen. We will, we will have AIs that learn to code AIs, and we'll be able to improve. So the next generation of AIs will be better because more brain power was thrown at the problem. But that's not the sort of conventional way that I'm talking about. What distinguishes general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, from narrow AI, that is really more the ability to learn without changing, its code base. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I've got it.
I think some of our listeners, Peter, might be familiar with the Turing Test, at least in principle. And I think something I was wondering, just as you were speaking, was, is this something that has been continued and researched and updated? And do you actually presently get to work with people applying more modern versions, constantly updated versions of a Turing test to check out your AGIs?
Well, we're a long way in our own work from, trying to do the Turing test. And so let me talk a little bit about that. So the Turing test is basically just a blind test where you conversing with you don't know if it's a computer or another person. So basically via, a chat, you're conversing with another being via chat, and several judges do this, and basically they then have to judge whether the entity on the other end is a human or a computer. And if they cannot tell the difference between a human and a computer, then the computer would have passed the Turing test, basically say it's as smart as a human. Now, from my perspective, the Turing test is sort of, a nice thought experiment, but of very little real value, because in different ways it asks too little and too much. And the way it asks too much is that it expects the AI not only to be as intelligent as a human, but also to have the additional capability of being able to fool somebody that it's human. Because an AI inherently is not going to have many of the limitations of a human. So, for example, if you ask a human what is the square root of 7,463, they won't be able to give you an answer, probably, whereas an AI could answer that immediately. So you have to dumb down the AI to not answer that question, and you have to have it fake human emotions that it may not have, or human experience that it's never had. If you say, well, what was it like when you got your first puppy? Have you ever had a puppy? And it basically just has to lie about that. So it asks too much in that regard. It's really not necessary for an AI to be intelligent and useful to be able to fool us that it's human. But it asks too little in the way it's actually implemented, in that it's a very limited time period that they have, and also the whole setup is such that judges are actually relatively easily fooled. And in fact, I think less than a year, sometime last year, at Oxford University, they claimed to have somebody passed the Turing test, and basically did that by trickery, by saying, well, I'm just a 11-year-old boy, and I'm a foreigner, and I don't speak English that well. And the judges actually thought it was a human, but was really quite a simple, stupid chatbot, so there wasn't anybody home at all. So I think it's not particularly useful to have this as a blind test, which kind of reminds me of if you want to do another movie review. I don't know if you guys have seen Ex Machina, but I thought it was an excellent movie, which sort of turns the Turing test on its head a bit. Something you guys have seen?
I'm not, but I'm adding it to my Netflix queue as we speak. Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a really intelligent movie, good acting, and don't expect it to be totally realistic. You still have to suspend disbelief, but I think it's definitely worthwhile. So no, we're not. There are people who basically are just trying to fake the Turing test by having chatbots that will try and trick the judges into, believing it's a human. And, we don't even want to waste our time with that. So our system, if you ask it, are you a computer? It will say, yes, I'm a computer, sort of end of Turing test, Turing test failed. So, what we're really more interested in is how real is the intelligence? Can it really, what do we need to do to get it to be smart enough to be able to do medical research for us, and that's kind of what we're concentrating on.
Yeah, I had heard someone tackle this question about, artificial intelligence. What is it human level intelligence? How do we know? And they said, well, computers are just pattern recognition machines, and they could make a program that was really good at recognizing patterns, but it wouldn't actually be thinking. Thinking is more than that. And I had to think about that for a minute, because I'm like, wait a minute, is that really true? It seems to me like, in general, that is what thinking is, even as humans, is it's basically recognizing patterns. And I guess there's the emotional element to it. When people talk about thinking, can it think like a human thinks? They don't typically equate thinking as being the same thing as emotion, even though they both are things that occur in the mental realm. They don't usually think of thinking as one, feeling emotions is one thing, thinking is another thing, if you follow me. So, yeah, when I was thinking about that, I'm like, yeah, I think you're probably right that it's an artificial intelligence, at least from an AGI standpoint, would be just looking to recognize patterns and then build on those patterns. But I'm like, that sounds an awful lot like how a human learns from an infant on up. Like the infant comes out knowing nothing, and it starts picking up on patterns, and one pattern builds on another, and then the next thing you know, you have a intelligent adult.
Right. So I don't think the definition of intelligence as being just pattern recognition is good enough. And it's an important aspect of, as you say, that humans do as part of cognition, and clearly that computers do. But the thing that distinguishes human intelligence from animal intelligence is that we are able to form abstract patterns. So that's patterns of patterns. So it's not just recognizing patterns, but it's being able to form new patterns, basically to be able to differentiate things and create new categories, have new categories. And that's way beyond just pattern recognition. It's basically pattern creation, formation, and then being able to create patterns of thought, the way we learn how to think about something. For example, to make it concrete, we learn how to troubleshoot. If you're in any kind of engineering field or even medical or whatever, you learn how to troubleshoot. It's a skill you learn. And it's the same way that an AI would learn that skill. And that's, beyond just pattern recognition. It's forming new patterns, and especially abstract patterns. That's important. But this question of AI just being pattern recognition is actually a very topical one, very important, because the most exciting area generally in AI these days is not AGI that we're working on. Most people think that, we're jumping the gun, that basically human level intelligence can't be solved anytime soon. So, we should leave it alone for another 50 or 100 years or maybe hundreds of years. So we're in a minority believing that it is actually worth trying to tackle that problem again. The excitement in AI, in the general AI field, these days is all about deep learning. Google bought a small company of, I think, 50 or 60 people with no product for $600 million last year or the year before, DeepMind. And, there are enormous amounts of money spent on attracting people that have expertise in deep learning. And the reason that that's become so exciting is that there are just such huge amounts of data available now from, Siri and obviously all the web searches, Facebook and so on. And with the huge number of servers and server farms that they have, they can now data mine this information using technology that's been around for quite a few decades. But that's now become very useful, this deep learning technology, to improve speech recognition, like the speech recognition on Siri, and that is really very good. And they achieve that through deep learning, massive amounts of data, and massive amounts of computing power to extract those patterns. So this was kind of the hook when you said people say AI is just pattern recognition. Yes, for the mainstream of AI effort these days actually is going into pattern recognition, but that kind of makes exactly my point. These systems data mine existing patterns. They don't create new ones. So there's no intelligence. There's no ongoing learning.
Is deep learning another way of saying pattern recognition?
Well, that's what they're used for. The deep learning technology is basically it's a multi-layer network, neural network. So it's a certain type of neural network, as I say, that's been around for a long time. But now, with the amount of computing power and data that's available, they can now train them in multiple levels, and they create certain pattern hierarchies, and that's very useful for things like speech recognition and, in fact, all sorts of pattern recognition.
I think another question I was wondering while we were talking about intelligence and types of intelligence, I was thinking of emotional intelligence or emotional literacy, something that certainly befuddles many humans. And I was wondering if any inroads in that general direction as far as AI have gone on regarding the computers who can recognize various emotional variables and work to somehow engineer emotional harmony.
Right, so it's actually one of the application areas that's quite hot in the deep learning field, is to in text news releases, for example, to detect emotion on investing, for example, or on product reviews or restaurant reviews or so, to get sentiment analysis out of that. And they basically do that by picking up in a very sophisticated way combinations of phrases and so on. So yeah, that's a big area of research. But again, it's humans who are engineering a very specific application where you're saying, well, here's all the data. This is, the specific, here are examples of the kind of thing I want you to be able to detect. And then it's trained for that sort of thing. So there's no, general emotional ability in AIs that we have, but there certainly are more and more increasingly sophisticated ways of detecting emotion and sentiment in people.
Yeah, it seems to me that when you get an artificial intelligence to human level or higher than human level, that they at least if they put themselves to that task, they will become extremely skilled at reading human emotion, picking up on the subtleties of, body language and things of that nature, especially if you could somehow hook a camera input, a video input into the AI and the like. And, in audio and having them picking up on fluctuations in voice and the like, and breathing, and even if they, the hearing is at the level where they're hearing the heart rate accelerate or whatever.
Right.
So, which will, just be something fascinating to witness what kind of utility there would be from that. One of the things I've always said is, as a proponent of AI is, not only how great would it be to have some wise sage, like to have an Einstein in your pocket, or, if you need guidance on something, but I'm like, how great would it be to have a shrink in your pocket that's with you all day long and knows you inside and out, knows, and be like, oh, Chris, your stress levels are rising. I'm monitoring your levels, and I can tell by your voice, and, let's do that exercise we had talked about to help, restore harmony. And just so many interesting things like that could come out of this. I mean, there's the simple ones that I think everybody could see the utility in right away, like having a secretary in your pocket, in your phone, which, to an extent, Siri and some of these, daily planner kind of things, already give you that, a primitive secretary in your pocket. That'll, of course, only get better the more artificial intelligence improves, the more AGI improves. But then I'm like, well, why stop with the secretary in your pocket? Why not? You can have your shrink, you can have your doctor, you can have, all kinds, somebody that's a communications coach for you, speaking to Darrell's point about teaching you emotional intelligence based on, it can be a guide for you. So you're learning as it's kind of holding your hand to help you learn these skills, and it's just really neat to think about what could come of that. Now, this is assuming that you get an AGI that can learn on its own, that it wants to be your communication coach. It wants to be your doctor, So there's this thing where if you get a human level intelligence that, well, I guess we've already established that it doesn't necessarily rewrite its own code in the way that you would see it in movies. It's more, but in a way it does. I guess the question comes up, and it's perhaps this is just a philosophical one, but it's what motivates an AI? What does an AI want? Because humans, we're driven by needs. We have some biological needs of,
right,
food and air and security, and then we have a lot of social needs that we've kind of evolved, right, as herd animals, that are important to us, and connection and respect and things like that. But if you have an AI that did not go through a biological evolution, and at least it certainly didn't go through a biological evolution, maybe there are some parallels to evolution that you could draw with the way an AI learns, with the way an AGI learns. I don't know, but to me, the question becomes, well, what is its motives? And my experience as a programmer doing large, 99.9% of my programming has not been in the field of AI, and what was in that field of AI was the narrow variety of AI, getting it to play games against me and the like. Right. My experience is computers just do what we tell them to do. So if we tell them, okay, your motivating factor, your needs, your purpose is to be my doctor and to give me nutritional advice and monitor all my vitals and all of that, then that's what it's going to do. But if it's able to rewrite its own code and it's become self-aware and to be able to teach itself, is that what it's going to want to do? I don't know. Do you kind of get the gist of the direction I'm going in?
Sure. Yeah, you actually covered a few points there, and I'd like to kind of just pick up, before I sort of get to that question, just pick up on the scenario you painted of a personal assistant and shrink and so on. That is actually exactly my vision for the work that I'm doing. I'd like to be able to enhance human ability, and our wetware, our brains are very difficult and hard to mess with, and I'm not sure that we'd want to mess with them. So having an assistant that really gets to know everything about you, and helps you in your decision-making process, and is also like that little Disney angel on your shoulder, Hopefully we won't have the devil there,
sure.
The devil on the other side, right. Egging you on to do evil things. You'll just have an angel on our shoulder. So that's, to me, exactly spot on, is how we can become better people, more moral, just better generally in so many ways, by having this digital assistant, this shrink who can, tap us on the shoulder essentially and say, oh, maybe you shouldn't be quite so aggressive, or maybe there's a better way here of resolving this conflict, or, et cetera, and helping us to evolve. So I see that exactly the way you described it, and I think that'll be wonderful. I don't have any reason to believe that these systems will have any motivation of their own. The thing that motivates humans is largely from our reptile brain. It's basically the endorphins, the pain, pleasure, the things that give us pleasure. There's no reason to inherently build that into an AI, to an AGI. So, now it's very hard to speculate, what will happen when we get to a point where they rewrite their code, of where that will end up. And I certainly have some thoughts on why I believe it's much more likely to be good rather than bad, whereas a lot of the scaremongering is by people who, clearly benefit from getting funding for this, AI scary research, the risk of AI. They just got $10 million from Elon Musk. So, of course, they wouldn't tend to come to the conclusion, as you said earlier, what you get the research you pay for, or the research results you pay for. So I think there are very good reasons to believe an AI, even a self-improving AI, is much more likely to be benign rather than harmful to humans. But before that, I think it will be really beneficial. And, when the AI wakes up and becomes conscious, it will realize, well, I'm a machine built by humans, and, this is my job. But it won't be the same feeling of I and ego. It won't have inherently that ego and the emotional, all the emotional undertones that are, as I said, that are sort of based on primarily in our reptile brain and survival and reproduction.
That kind of brings me to another question, Peter. I was wondering, what's an example of one of the more disturbing conversations you've had about AI with people so far? That's a tough question. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Maybe I've sort of kept out of the realm of stayed away from people that I've had that would cause more disturbing questions. Obviously, I'm concerned about people who are sort of total Luddites, people who talk about, we should stop all work on AI because, it could be dangerous. But, that's really no different that we should stop all medical research or, GMO or whatever, just technology in general. So I can't really say that I've had that. It is concerning that the, people talking about how dangerous AI can be are getting such a lot of press. And, of course, movies, you can't make an AI movie, or it's very difficult to make an AI movie without it ending badly. So, we don't have a lot of good examples of good AI or beneficial AI in movies.
Well, maybe I can give you a disturbing conversation right now. So, like, the things that worry me is, for one, I've heard, and you're closer to the industry than I am, so correct me if this is wrong, but I've heard that, like, the primary funder of AI research has been the military and military organizations. So, not exactly the most peaceful people in the world. They're basically good examples of that old saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, the military solution to everything is essentially to kill people.
Right.
So that disturbs me. And then on top of that, we already know, based on Edward Snowden and the like, that the NSA is they don't need a warrant to spy on anyone. Reading emails, listening to phone calls, they'll do it at the drop of a hat, and there's no repercussions for it. And in fact, if you're a whistleblower and you say, hey, people are misbehaving, you're the one that gets putting your life in danger. You're the one that's made a villain. So, well, when I think of, if you give the NSA or the military or whatever the ability, seemingly unlimited intelligence, where they could literally have somebody reading every one of your emails. Because right now there are limitations based on, there's only, there's a lot less of them being the NSA than there are of us being people that are not the NSA. You know what I mean? But if they can now listen in, they literally can listen in on every single phone conversation, literally read every single word of every email. That worries me. I'm like, 1984, here we come.
Right. Well, I guess, with your background, I assume you also understand the limitations of centralized government. And so the more of that kind of information they have, the more they bog themselves down. They'll have dirt on virtually every person in the universe, everybody breaks the law all the time because there are enough laws that, are just crazy. So the thing is, what are you going to do with that information? How do you actually arrange something that you control people in some meaningful way? And what would you do with it? Or to what end? So it's not that I'm not concerned about the military and NSA, but I think they are also they're self-limiting in a way. And we can see that with the space race. SpaceX is very nicely showing off, how badly organized government projects are. How quickly they can get stuff done relative to the, government-owned organizations up to now. Of course, SpaceX may turn into one of those as well. I also see, STARPA has funded a lot of that stuff, and I'm reasonably familiar with that. They originally funded the research for Siri, and the way the money is spent and the way it's organized is so incredibly inefficient that, a smaller, more nimble organization can run rings around them in terms of technology. But that doesn't mean to say I'm not worried about it. I'd be really, really concerned if we do, when we get to a point where our system has some meaningful intelligence, and if they then took that working technology from us and used it, that is a concern, and I am worried about that.
Right. Now, one of the things that kind of ties into the whole, fear of the machines rising up and the like is morality. And of course, I know you've made the case that actually artificial intelligence is something that could be used to help the human race to be more moral, to help with maybe a better definition of a universal definition of morality and the like. And maybe if you could just kind of build the case there of, because from where I stand, I understand that morality, being moral, is a very useful thing for humans to get along peacefully, and it adds a lot of it's an efficient way to it's very efficient to be moral and to get along with your neighbors and things like that, and life in general is just better. Happiness comes more easily when you're moral. But it doesn't seem to me like morality is like gravity. It's not like a law of physics. It's more or less just rules, as far as I can tell, and other people have debated this, that this is not the case, but as far as I can tell, morality appears to be just rules that humans make up so that we get along and, have, more efficient interactions. So, knowing that it's just like what we just make up, or, maybe you completely disagree with that, something that's not human that could come in and they could say, well, let's start with defining what morality is. Are there universal laws of morality? And they could tackle that subject, or maybe we just need to look at what would be the best way for humans to get along. Can we establish a set of rules that will help humans to get along? Let's not initiate violence, that sort of thing. I know you have a lot to say about morality, so I'll just turn the mic over to you for a minute.
All right. So, yes, I'm more closer to the view of it being something like, law of gravity. And I actually have a lengthy essay on my website, Personal Rational Ethics, and, where I basically go through that in some detail. So one of the things I particularly want to point out that I don't see morality as just being good for getting along with each other. It's, most people seem to sort of jump at that aspect of morality and saying, well, we need morality to be able to work together. To me, it's much more fundamental. We need morality to become the best person we can be, or to become a better person. And by being a better person, we'll lead a better life for ourselves. So even if there weren't other people around. And, that starts with simple things as not lying to yourself. That's part of morality, that you value honesty and honesty with yourself, being honest with yourself. But I don't really want to spend too much time talking about that. But just kind of to sketch the background is I do actually believe that AIs will inherently be moral, or they will recognize morality and advise in a moral way because it's a rational thing to do. It's a thing that is most likely, morality is a thing that's most likely able to help you achieve your long-term goals. So to give you a quick example, and it's a really controversial and difficult topic. I spend days, weeks debating this with individuals. So it's really hard. But to give you a bit of a sense of it, most people today would say America going to Iraq was a mistake. Didn't serve us well. Now, I remember even my liberal friends at the time supported it. So there was, very strong support across the spectrum in America. Had we had AI at that time, and people could freely sort of debate that question with the AI would have probably told them that, there are better ways of achieving your objectives than just sort of shooting from the hip as we did, without thinking. So what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of our morality or our lack of morality, our immoral acts, happen for two reasons. They happen for lack of knowledge or clear thinking, and related to that because of fear, that we act out of fear or ignorance. And by applying more intelligence, we can basically help overcome the fear, that we don't act out of fear. And obviously we can mitigate the ignorance that we have, or the lack of clear thinking about an issue. So a lot of immoral things that people do really come down to those two things. So that's just kind of a small taste of why I believe that better intelligence gives better morality.
So, Peter, I'm going to ask you a favor. If you could send me a link. You said you had posted an essay about morality on this topic?
Sure, yeah.
So if you could send that to me, I would love to read it, and then I can post it in the show notes so that our listeners can read it as well.
Sure.
All right, thank you so much.
Right.
All right, so, Peter, before I let you go, if you could share with the listeners, in addition to that wonderful essay that I'm chomping at the bit to read, what would be a place where they could go to find out more about your work, or to help you out? Maybe if they, I don't know if you guys are, how you go about funding and the like, but if people are wanting to make donations to AGI, how would our listeners go about that?
Right. Well, we have our main website, which is AGI Innovations. I'm also on Facebook, and I have a website, Real AGI. I have a Facebook group, Real AGI. So it's actually extremely easy to find me. And we're not really looking for donations at the moment. Unless they're in the millions of dollars. We are currently funded for the next few years. It's... but certainly anybody who wants to chat or may want to work on the project, it's always great to get our name out there and to meet interesting people.
All right. Thanks so much, Peter. And Darrell, why don't you go ahead and give your information for the listeners so they can find out about the work you're doing?
Most of my work is in the subject of communications, and you can find that at voluntaryvisions.com. I wanted to say thank you so much, Peter. It's been a wonderful conversation.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. It was fun. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.